Is this a victory? Or is it a trap?
In August 1914, the Lublin voivodeship became the inevitable meeting point for two massive empires. The geography of the Eastern Front dictated that the forces of Russia and Austria-Hungary would collide right here. The Austro-Hungarian High Command was well aware they were facing numerically superior Russian forces. Their strategic logic was simple. They had to strike first, launching a preemptive offensive to disrupt the Russian mobilization before it could gather its full strength. To make this happen, the European rail network was pushed to its limit, dumping hundreds of thousands of troops into the sector at speeds that would have been unimaginable just a generation earlier. This industrial-scale deployment created an immediate crisis on the ground. 19th-century planning was about to buckle under the weight of 20th-century mass and momentum. Pre-war doctrine relied heavily on vast cavalry screens to ride ahead of the main army, pinpointing enemy concentrations and scouting the route of advance. But in the wooded terrain of Lubelshchina, those screens failed completely. The scouting patrols missed each other entirely, creating a reconnaissance vacuum where the main infantry bodies of both empires marched toward a head-on collision, completely unaware of the other's location. While the armies closed the distance, the local environment remained eerily normal. Civilian farmers were out in the fields, desperately trying to finish the summer rye harvest as two imperial juggernauts converged on their land. There was no time for careful maneuvering. The transition from an agricultural harvest to kinetic slaughter was near instant as the blind armies finally made contact. Because the armies marched into the fight without intelligence, they sacrificed all flexibility. The ensuing battle would be decided by blunt, brutal frontal attrition. That initial engagement began on August 23rd at Kraśnik. It was the first major battle of the campaign, pitting the Austro-Hungarian 1st Corps against the Russian 14th Corps. The fighting immediately transitioned from open movement into a semi-positional struggle. Austro-Hungarian troops took advantage of the terrain, utilizing hastily excavated earthworks and firing through defensive loopholes to hold their ground. The Russian response relied on massed infantry assaults, but their doctrine had a fatal flaw. They consistently ordered frontal attacks without waiting for the necessary artillery support to suppress the Austrian positions. Alfred Knox, a British attaché on the scene, recorded the result. Russian infantry advanced against intact machine gun fields. They were short on shells and lacked the heavy field guns required to neutralize the fortified Austrian lines. The infantry bore the absolute brunt of the casualties. The Russian command structure was simply unable to synchronize its massive manpower with the realities of 20th-century firepower. Despite having roughly equal artillery, General Viktor Dankl held a decisive advantage in the one area that mattered for a frontal grind. He had 40 extra battalions of infantry at his disposal. Dankl leveraged this sheer numerical weight to hammer the Russian center. Eventually, the weight of the Austrian mass overwhelmed the defenders and shattered their lines. The defeat sent the Russian Fourth Army into a disorganized retreat, with troops falling back north toward the communications hub of Lublin. This was the first major triumph for Austria-Hungary. Dankl was elevated to the rank of Count, and the victory was celebrated as a sign of Habsburg military superiority. However, this tactical success created a dangerous illusion. The battlefield victory was masking a structural crisis that was already beginning to paralyze the army. Every mile the Austro-Hungarians gained north of Kraśnik was undermining their own stability. Their tactical success was pulling them into a trap. By pushing the Russians back, Dankl drew his forces into a deep, overextended salient, moving further away from his railheads. Then the weather turned. Torrential autumn rains hit the Lublin corridor, falling on roads that were already pulverized by the passage of thousands of men and horses. The heavy artillery and supply wagons churned the unpaved roads into liquid mud. Transport ground to a halt. Horses foundered in thick clay, and the entire logistical spine of the army began to snap. Dankl's army had essentially outrun its own ability to exist. By marching so successfully, they had severed their own supply lines and neutralized their ability to continue the fight. The result was a corridor of shattered infrastructure. Villages were ruined, trenches cut natural drainage, and roads were choked with paralyzed transport and exhausted men. The tactical brilliance and the courage shown at Kraśnik were rendered irrelevant. Bravery could not overcome the physical limitations of horse-drawn transport and deep mud. The 1914 Lublin Campaign demonstrates the lethal friction of modern warfare. Both empires lost their war of maneuver to the environmental and industrial realities of the 20th century. The millions of men marching into the salient were already being defeated by the very ground they were struggling to conquer.